Good evening, guys. Winter's Day drops tomorrow, so let's have a Q&A in which we talk about nothing remotely Christmassy at all. As ever, I'm picking the questions for these videos from the comments below, earliest, first come, first serve. So if I missed yours, you can try it again this week, and maybe if you get a bit earlier, it'll get in. Alright, so let's do it. The first one's actually a pretty cool lore question. Got me thinking of some stuff in the old Canthan lore that I haven't appreciated for a while. It comes from Girl Painting, who says, "Hey WP, when you were talking about the Wardens in Guild Wars 1, which we did last week, they said, I was also thinking about the big cacti creatures that the Kurziks are using. In the story mission in Guild Wars 1, we see that humans are kind of converted into these creatures, much like many minions from the Elder Dragons are created. Do you think that could be a primitive version of dragon corruption, used but somehow not influenced by the dragon itself?" Just thinking. So to bring everyone in the loop, big cacti creatures, I'm hoping I've got this right with what you're trying to talk about here. I think you're talking about the Juggernauts. Their connection, perhaps, with Elder Dragons, I think is definitely on the table. You know, they could easily squeeze the story, warp the lore to be able to say, hey, you know, some resident dragon around here had something to do with this Juggernaut process. Canthan was very interesting because it was a story that was largely dominated by this idea of corruption in two different areas. Number one, they set up, while we were on this continent, Cantha, 200 years before the events of the story, there had been this great thing called the Jade Wind, which, if you think about it, corrupted great swathes of land. It corrupted an inland sea and turned it all to jade, and it corrupted a forest which was vibrant and verdant and full of life and turned it to stone. And so the setting immediately was a place where much corruption had already existed, and then the story itself in the present day of factions, Guild Wars 1 factions when we were playing it, again was about this corruption, this affliction that was coming through and infecting people and devastating the populations. And at many different levels in that story, that was like a big theme of factions. You know, you could even look at the government ministries and the corruption that lied within them and blah, 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 blah. But these two big magical corruptions we hear about that dominate the story, the Jade Wind on the one hand, the Affliction on the other, in the Echo Vowed Forest they set up a whole other story, this story of the Juggernauts, and it seems to be completely unrelated to both of those. So I'll tell you guys my retelling of it. For what it's worth, this is really enjoyable lore to me. This is an example of some of the depth old Guild Wars 1 lore used to go to that will feel very magical and exotic in my retelling of it, hopefully anyway, when you read about it at the very least. And I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm so familiar with Guild Wars 2 now, but I feel like some of this magic I don't really experience anymore. So anyway, the Juggernauts, okay? We've got, mechanically in that game, there were two factions. You had the Luxons and the Kurziks. And mechanically, they both had, like, some kind of big powerhouse unit that they both owned. You had the people of the sea, the Luxons, they owned their siege turtles, okay? And the corresponding mechanic that the Kurziks had, their like big minion type entity, were the Juggernauts. And so in the story, in the various game types, you know, the PvP game types and stuff, you'd have these things going head to head. You'd have the siege turtles could do massive damage, but the Juggernauts were very slow, and if they managed to get to the siege turtles, they'd flip them over and stuff, and that was just kind of where it came from. But the story itself, as to where these Juggernauts existed from, does get dived into in the story if you chose to become a Kurzik character. Remember, in Guild Wars 1, at this point, you could actually pick a faction to go for. You'd either be one or the other. And so what the Juggernauts were a Kurzik invented process. So Kurziks were humans, and they had learned to tie the souls of some very special select humans. Humans, they say, were chosen by the gods. As humans, these, even though they were Kurziks, their specific pantheon lineup may have been slightly different. They believed in some lesser deities, for example, that wouldn't have been accepted elsewhere in the world. Especially that's true for the Luxons. But the Kurziks in general were humans that believed in the gods. And they said that the gods had chosen some specific souls. We don't really know what that selection process was, but these people could become Juggernauts. They would undergo an annual ceremony at a place called the Eternal Grove. Yeah, the Eternal Grove. Whenever you look at the Echo Vowed Forest, there are so many terms that crop up that are incredibly similar to Sylvari-based stuff. In Guild Wars 2, we have the Grove. Well, this place was called the Eternal Grove, and here, once a year, there would be these Kurziks called the Tree Singers who would sing this like lovely song. As far as the story was concerned, we had just been granted ownership as being a guardian of this event, and of course the Luxons come and attack, and the Afflicted attack, and you've got to defend them while the Tree Singers are singing their song. But these Tree Singers sing this wonderful song. The actual text you get in game is our only example, according to the wiki, of old Kurzik. So the Kurziks had their old ancient language, and this was a song sung in that tongue. And as long as the tree singers could complete singing their song, this human being, this person, this Kurzik, would completely transform. And their entire life would change. Their personality would, in theory, remain unaffected, so they were still them, but they completely changed in body to become these giant plant-like creatures, these eternal defenders of the Kurziks. And the idea was that they were being bound, their soul was being tied to these things the Kurziks called the forever trees. And these forever trees wouldn't like die of old age, hence their name, they wouldn't die. And as long as the forever tree was alive, the Juggernaut would also be alive. And so this was how the Kurziks basically made their superhuman warriors. And yeah, you're right, you now tie this to Guild Wars 2, and you see this story, and you see this setup, and it does sound a lot like, you know, dragons would corrupt people in this way, especially if you think of stuff like Jormag, and you think of the Colossus, okay? He creates minions for himself, and the Colossus, well, you know, a different color and sort of a different shape, in general scale, it's very similar to what we saw with the Juggernauts. So, again, is this tied somehow to an Elder Dragon thing? You know, that's a very hard question to answer. As I say, I do think it's possible, because we're dealing with planty stuff, of course, Morgemoth is what we're going to be thinking of, and there could be some elaborate story where one of Morgemoth's seeds was, in fact, in the Echovald Forest, and it grew, and the Eternal Grove was a freaking grove, just like what we had here. Maybe this is where the Wardens came from. Remember, everything I mentioned about the Wardens last episode, that it has nothing to do with the Kurziks, necessarily. The Wardens were just a group of peoples theorized to maybe have once been humans, because they looked kind of human-ish, but ultimately weren't humans, that defended the forest, and 200 years ago, when this giant corruption occurred, they kind of went crazy and very angry and hated humans for corrupting and destroying their homeland. So the Wardens are something totally different. They've got nothing really to do with this creation of the Juggernauts, but these are all kind of similar-ish things. So there could be an elaborate story where one of Morgemoth's seeds ended up here, the Wardens were there, ultimately the Kurziks came in, kicked them out, the Kurziks learned some weird magics, figured out how to tap into the corruption of Morgemoth's seed somehow. Don't forget that if there was a Pale Tree there, the avatar of the Pale Tree that we know, they probably had one as well, and that was probably this great creature called Urgos, which again feels kind of similar to Juggernauts. Oh, it's this wonderful, beautiful, complicated mess, and I really hope when we go to Cantha that ArenaNet can properly dive into this stuff, because it's very fun to look at. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to share that story with you guys. And let's go on to the next question before we talk about it for too long. This one comes from Rinkmeth who says, do you think Guild Wars 2 uses Deus Ex Machina too often as a plot device? The memory seeds, for example. So what we're talking about here, guys, is, oh, hey, we have a problem. Don't worry, I'll just throw this random thing at you, and it solves itself. I think for the big stories, they're okay. Right, there's not too much Deus Ex Machina, and I think most of the time, especially as gamers, especially as MMO gamers, people are very forgiving of minor Deus Ex Machina like this, where they say, oh yeah, look, here's just a memory seed. This one is a bit more stinging, though, because obviously it's like, wow, if we could just go back in time, we'll see visions like this so easily. Why are there any questions unanswered? You know, there's another big one as well. Right at the start of the game, Kaith talks about how the Pale Tree sent her into the dream to find you. I'm sorry, what? Why hasn't this happened again? Why don't we utilize this a little more? We're just skipping over that? That's never happened again? There are little things like that, and I think it is kind of bad. You know, these are the reasons why a lot of people aren't into the story, beyond just poor, you know, in-game execution of their plots, right? You know, if they had better cutscenes, if their sound design was better during some of these really good... But they're working on it, you know? Deus Ex Machina, though, it definitely exists, and, you know, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little bit annoyed about it, because it does kind of suck. The next one's from Dries Hoffman, who says, hey WP, a question about the orbs and their connections to the dragons. So, we think that the orbs are connected to the dragons, but what about Glint's egg? If the egg hatches, then there should be a new orb too, right? Or have the orbs a totally different origin? Slight issue here. Just because Glint's egg hatches, it won't necessarily mean the offspring is instantly an Elder Dragon. Glint herself was not an Elder Dragon. She was positioning herself into a position where she maybe could have become an Elder Dragon, particularly, you know, if the defeat of Kraukatoric had occurred, but none of that ever happened. She wasn't an Elder Dragon. And we're talking about an entity that, what did they say, at least 2,000 years old? 3,000 years old, did they say? An old entity here. And now we're talking about a fresh new baby dragon that's, you know, while probably going to be powerful, not necessarily that kick-ass straight away. So, I mean, but okay, let's put that to the side. Let's assume, you know, this egg is going to hatch. It is going going to become an Elder Dragon. Way, awesome. You know, there's going to be some Deus Ex Machina that explains this. Well, yeah, so the orbs, good question. Because we know that they seem to be tied to them. Let's recap what we know most, okay? We've heard, sort of dabbled with at least 2 of the orbs. The main one was evidenced in the personal story of Guild Wars 2. It was the blue orb. Its initial location is a thing of mystery, supposedly from the deep sea, a powerful artifact that could fight off dragon corruption. And we used it in Fort Trinity. Presumably it's still there in Fort Trinity. That's actually one thing I'm a little bit disappointed in that Trohan hasn't mentioned. They've done very well since the Pact came back to mention cool little things like, you know, the Glory of Tyria, stuff like that. Haven't really mentioned the orbs that much, right? But, you know, in theory, it is still at Fort Trinity, and this was instrumental in us getting a foothold to actually launch war, wage war against Zaitan. It's going to have to be another story that comes up, right? Surely. I hope they don't just leave them as these complete enigmas. And definitely, like, what is it? Is it tied to the Deep Sea Dragon? Did it come into existence when she did? Do the Elder Dragons create orbs for themselves? But why? Is someone else doing it? A third party? Something to do with the gods, maybe? I don't know. It really is one of those questions in a vacuum right now where the branches you can speculate down, as far as I can see it, actually aren't too plentiful. But I hope they return to it, and it's a good thought, because I hadn't really thought of that either. Well, when would a new orb come into existence? Are the orbs perpetual? Can they be destroyed, as the Elder Dragons can be? Do the orbs represent these bodies of magic, realm-ish things, as we've come to, you know, learn about in recent patches? Are they just, like, physical embodiments of them? If we're ever going to change this balance, this way of the universe, is it through them we're going to do it? I have no idea. Moving on, the next one is from Jep Grin, who says, "What do you have for breakfast today?" I had, and this is a classic for me, pate on toast. What a meal, and it's not as posh as it sounds, and I recommend it to anyone. Next is from Idij Kaji, who says, "Do you think ArenaNet is working on creating a Guild Wars 3 anytime? Or do you think the next game they will create will be a new separate IP?" No, I don't. I really don't. Okay, listen, they already confirmed they're not working on a separate IP. The idea that ArenaNet have been working on a big project in the background has existed for a long time. It's existed long enough that when one of the concept artists at ArenaNet put on their personal website a crazy futuristic looking thing that everyone said, "Oh my god, this must be Canfield 250 years in the future." It's amazing. They actually came out and said, no, this concept art here, sorry, this actually doesn't have anything to do with Guild Wars. This is a totally separate IP, and he was basically being contracted, or the artist, I don't actually know whether it was male or female artist, this person was just being contracted out by someone else to do this. It's really got nothing to do with ArenaNet. We are not working on a different IP. We have no intention on working on a different IP. And you have to look as well, and this is a very old quote, but I still think that they're in general the same, despite all the negativity and, oh, ArenaNet's a completely different company that flies through the community lately. Ages ago, they did say, you know, just as Guild Wars 2 was coming out, and I get that opinions can change, and it has been 2 years, but they said that they had no interest at all in working on a Guild Wars 3. Why would they have an interest in that? Really? I know it may feel to us, as especially the veteran players who have been playing since launch, it may feel like, you know, Guild Wars 2 isn't a new game anymore, but compared to successful MMO life cycles out there, we're still very early on. A lot of people forget, WoW had 3 years where pretty much nothing was going on. Very minor patches and balance and tweaks and bug fixes. 3 years before it had its first expansion. Now, I'm not saying I think Guild Wars 2 is in a position now where it's going to have its first expansion in 3 years. That would mean that it's coming in about 6 months. I actually think if we get an expansion, it will be 12 to 18 months from now. But, you know, that's a long time, and it's not totally unheard of. We're just chomping at the bits, and it's crazy that we're chomping at the bits. I think it's because of the living story and because so many people are still trying to, like, hang around-ish. Obviously, we're in this terrible position where they don't want to admit to us that they're working on anything, but I think it is a ludicrous proposition that they're working on another IP. I really, really do. It's like you're saying that the company suddenly lost faith completely in Guild Wars 2, that, you know, they spent all this time working on this MMO, tried their very best. You remember all the big boastful comments they used to come out with? This is going to be the best MMO ever, blah, 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 you know, and then they're just going to drop it, like they feel like they've been defeated and now they're working on another IP. You know, they're a big company, a lot of people, we don't know what they're working on, and I'm sure that is not another IP. These are big names that were heavily invested in the development of original Guild Wars 2, working behind the scenes. I just can't see them making a totally different game, and I'll eat my hat. You know, I do also very much accept that this is a company, while they were developing the game, prided themselves heavily on being innovative and trying to change the formula and trying to do something different. And obviously, you want to change things to reach a new or better status quo, right? And maybe they feel like they missed the mark. And I do appreciate that then that same mentality could easily orient them as a company into trying another new IP, something else. But I also think it's that same mentality that is why they are so quiet in the background and they haven't been talking about stuff for so long, because they're trying to, they're trying to reinvent the wheel again in some way. And, you can have your own opinion on whether that's for better or worse. We'll have to see what it comes out like. That's sort of my opinion. I don't say anyone who thinks otherwise is totally wrong, because I can see the viewpoint. I'm just not that jaded, I think we're still very early on in the game's life, and I don't think they would have dropped it so quickly, Especially think about this. We're 2 years now. For them to have decided to start making it and actually start working on it would have been a year ago. Yeah, we're going to spend 5 years making a game, okay? We're going to spend 5 years making Guild Wars 2. 1 year after it comes out, we're going to say, fuck it, let's drop it, let's go make something else. That doesn't happen. Alright, next question is from Prandiator Asadavadavadavadavas. It says, are you a cannibal? WP, hint hint. Are you asking me if I eat potatoes? Yeah, I love potatoes. I love all kinds of potatoes. I eat chips. Those are fries to you guys. I eat baked potatoes. I eat potato wedges. I eat potato skins. I don't exist solely on a diet of that. I saw like an episode of Unhealthy Eaters or something the other day where all this woman ate was mash and it was disgusting and horrible. But yeah, potatoes, what a meal. You can have it with anything. I don't think I've ever heard of someone who doesn't actually like potatoes. Leave a comment if you don't like potatoes. Next question is from Hack and Slay, who says, why would they be testing that? I hope you will never be able to buy max level characters. I had a couple of comments about this. This is because last episode I talked about how I've got this level 80 Elementalist because they're testing their ability to do this. And now people are like, oh, this must be about being able to buy level 80 characters, blah, 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 blah. I have a couple of points on this. Number one, alright, some people are very offended by this idea, and I too, on a level, am offended by this idea. I don't like the idea of just being able to buy level 80 characters. It's like the World of Warcraft thing. Oh, you pre-order, you're going to get an instant character that's only 5 levels below max or whatever, right? I do think it's a bit weird, okay? But you do have to remember that this is a franchise that has its roots in getting people to max level very quickly and trying to eliminate that grind. And there are still some hardcore members of this community who really cling to that idea, even though Guild Wars 2's like clearly moved away from it. And you also have to consider that over the past year, they have added so much stuff that makes it easy to level up. I have well over 100 level up tomes just sat about in my bank. If I wanted an instant 80, I'd get an instant 80 straight away. We're about to get login rewards tomorrow, where again, there's even more, level up tomes. It just seems to me that if there was any game you were going to instantly buy level 80, though it twists me inside a bit, that's not actually that significant of a thing for Guild Wars 2. I do think it would be a bad move. I hope they never do it. I think the reason they're doing this is because I actually think maybe they're tools for testing the game. From what I've seen, just, generally heard, it seems like they're not totally sufficient a lot of the time. And certainly since the feature pack, where every time you level up, you get this crazy pop-up comes up that you have to click through, which, yes, is rewarding if you're on your main account or whatever, but let's say you're like a guy trying to test the game out, and then they try and, bump you, make a new character, they bump you to instant 80, you spent ages clicking through this stuff. I think that was probably a problem for them, and then they wanted to figure out a new system for doing that. And maybe that is of particular importance right now, because it looks like raids are going to be a thing in Guild Wars 2, and they really need a robust way to have instant 80s with proper gear, so they can test out different comps, find what the most entertaining, balance is going to be, and actually have well-geared characters. There is no point in them testing stuff out as they tested dungeons out when they were first originally being done, with everyone in just like rare gear, or everyone in, exotic PvT or whatever, and saying, oh yeah, this is a good balance, this feels difficult enough. And then the players are like, oh no, we know more about your game than you, and now it's suddenly very easy, right? So they really need to be able to test these things out quickly, easily, and that's why I think they're testing it. I don't think there's going to be anything on the gem store. Oh, we're already at 20 minutes. I've actually got a bunch more questions. That means there might be another Q&A on Wednesday. Tomorrow I'll be doing news about Winter's Day, but I do have a lot more I want to go into. So thanks very much for watching, guys. I will see you then. Hope you have a great evening, and I guess I'll see you tomorrow on Patch Day. Take it easy, guys. Catch you next time.